Friends, when someone asks you, what is Lent? What is your ready answer? The one that just can come trippingly adding out of you, like you know exactly what it is about and you are going to tackle it head on. Do you have this response at the ready? Because somebody might come to you and have vague understanding of what it means to be a part of the church and know that there is this 4-letter word and come to you and say, why is it that you do what you do? What is this season about? And you say, to give up something, to go to the wilderness, to prepare for Easter. Absolutely. What are your answers there at home? For me, here is the cheat sheet. I think 4 words that will help you on your way, perhaps when somebody comes up to you, but also when you ask yourself, what am I doing here? 4 words. Lent is for listening. Lent is for listening. The passage we have today frames the listening power of Jesus. There he is in the wilderness in the long pause before he embarks on his public ministry. Following his baptism, he is filled with the Holy Spirit and is invited not to go then preach on a mountaintop, not to go change water into wine, but instead to go into the darkness, the unsurety of what is out there, perhaps a desert stretch somewhere away from others, in order to empty his body and his mind of the desires that would distract him from his calling. Lent is for listening, because he's going to spend 40 days with the devil. And if we think about our own devils, even last night, Phoebe was able to articulate the devil of her own mind. We know from experience that the devil often sounds like our own inner rumblings, right? And in the absence of other distractions, we likely groan at having to listen to ourselves. Lent is for listening to ourselves. As Richard Rohr writes in his daily meditations on Lent, the most simple spiritual discipline is some degree of solitude and silence, but it's the hardest because none of us want to be with someone we don't love. To be with our own thoughts and our own feelings, to stop the addictive prayer wheels and just feel what we're feeling, think what we're thinking, is probably the most courageous act most of us will ever do. We've got to slow down the chatter, the stimulation. We've got to feel many feelings which have been pent up and denied for decades. We've become overloaded, which is why we're afraid to do it. What is caught up inside requires us to show up and have the strength to empty out that which does not serve us. Can you name them now? Our own fears, our own strivings, even our self-absorption. There's a way into that necessary wilderness, and Jesus invites us there. Lent is for listening. Lent is for listening to ourselves, whether we like it or not. As Thich Nhat Hanh says about meditation itself, with each in-breath, when we choose to stop and meditate and be and listen into our bodies, the cravings, the hunger, the craving for bread that we have, with each in-breath, we can notice we are breathing in, filling our lungs. And with each out-breath, we can notice that we are breathing out. When we breathe like this, our body and our mind come together. And when our body and our mind are together, we are capable of living life more fully. We're able to enjoy what is going on in and around us in each moment. We are not detached for a meal that is only focused on the physical self, but we look for things that would fill us, that would feed us from that emotional and spiritual level, knowing that we are indeed reliant upon the Spirit of God. We imagine Jesus' ability to show up into the moment of his greatest temptation when his body is craving that bread. And despite that hunger, he has come to a place of cultivating inner strength. It is from here that he gains the answers to respond to the devil's invitation. In this process, he overcomes those human hurdles that we face, and we learn from Jesus in the wilderness. He takes in those devil's words and transforms them with each responsive breath that he takes. Lent is for listening. Jesus dispels any illusion that bread or any material gain is the objective of our human journey. As Leah has shared with us, bread alone ain't never been enough. We will require more than bread alone to be filled with the Spirit of God. Jesus shows what it is to withstand the mental and the physical discomfort, and this will assist him later as he looks to the world and is able, alongside the considerable pains of others. How appropriate that in the season in which we would be seeking to emerge from pandemic, that we are going to be in the considerable company again of others. This Lenten time is such a suitable preparation for us, because we may be in spaces in which we have to continue to lean in where the mask is in order to truly listen where others are. The more we are in touch with our own reservations and fears, the better listeners we are able to become. If we think about this interaction with the devil as a long breathing, it is the detachment from the craving in which he gains clarity. When he takes in the craving and examines it for what it is, he's able to let go of it and maintain new clarity. Then Jesus refuses the kingdom of the world that the devil looks out and offers him. It's interesting that the devil believes those kingdoms to be his to bestow. And we look to warnings today, currently unfolding in this world, of what happens when one who is endowed with power seizes control and tries to subjugate others. Jesus refuses such power, like that which a king or a president would command. His leadership comes not in heroics, but in humility. Not in heroics, that which we can do and that which we can force on others, but in humility. And despite the devil's insistence on this third round when he comes, Jesus does not attempt to test God in order to prove his worthiness. He will not be safeguarded from suffering. He will confront the suffering of his own body and of the world. And he will come out on the other side in solidarity. Hereby, the Holy Spirit is ready access to join our hearts and our minds together for a clarity of purpose. Lent is for listening to ourselves and that which we detach or let go from, and is also then for listening to God. For there's new space. Have you ever noticed, if you've been engaged in a meditative prayer with your breath, as you continue to pay attention on what is coming in and what is let it go, how does your spirit, how does your body feel at that point? Do you feel the extra space that is gained? Do you feel the extra space in your mind, in your spirit, in your physical form? Jesus prepared for how he would be guided into ministry. Can you imagine all the times we know that he goes to the mountain and he has that breath, the equipment that is right there in his own body and spirit? He can breathe in all of the challenges that are surround him and breathe out a deep and abiding presence. In the Book of Joy, where Douglas Abrams presents the wisdom of Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, there's a discussion about what distinguishes prayer from meditation. He has heard it said that prayer is when we speak to God, and meditation is when God answers. Prayer is when we speak to God. That's probably part of that time when we're listening and wrestling with what is going on with us. Prayer is when we speak and we wail and we lament and we shout and we celebrate. We lift it unto God the matters of our heart, and meditation is when we come to that place of stillness, having breathed in and breathed out, and we are able and ready to listen anew. In the prolonged stretch of Lent, may our breath serve as the call and response, the emptying and the filling, as we ultimately ask the Spirit to speak to us. We are still now, and we ask that God would breathe on us and in us, infilling and indwelling with us, setting us for the inevitable mingling flow of suffering and joy that cycles in our own lives, reminding us of the resiliency to endure the walk to Jerusalem and our capacity to meet the pain of others with compassion, just as if we have found compassion and love even for ourselves. As we have listened to our longings and have slowed long enough to hear the heartbeat and breath of God as our own, we can trust in the ability to do this, friends, in Lent, in listening together. For as lonely as Lent can feel when we slow down and listen for ourselves, part of the beauty and the transforming quality of this season is that we are not doing it alone. As we gathered on the labyrinth, many of us at Ash Wednesday, some tuning in from Facebook, we could feel the breath of God around us, stoking the flames that were a part of our bonfire. How deeply oxygen is necessary as we breathe it in and prepare, and how desperately our world needs our breath of love, our breath of peace, coming from our singular bodies and from our collective church communities for such a time as this. This is the power of Lent. If we are able to truly listen to what we need and listen to what we can let go, isn't it powerful what God might be saying to us as our ears are now available, as our breath, as our lungs are now available, in a new way to lead the transformation of love? Don't we need it, friends, coming out of pandemic year 3? Year 3. 3 days in a tomb, friends, before we can expect that there would be a resurrection breath. The more that we listen in Lent, the more ready we will be able to hear the Spirit that emerges from the ashes and the embers of pandemic, that takes the lessons of our suffering, not pretending that it didn't happen, but showing the scars, taking the ashes and suitably putting them on our head and said, we are made for this life, the frailty, the hardships of this body, your body. And we can give that over with our breath as a gift to one another and a gift to this world in need of it. Each of us has to come to terms with our own journey, friends. On Ash Wednesday, as I was preparing to go to the parking lot to see many of you pull up, how great to see a line of cars ready to get ashes on their heads. I went out to the labyrinth, and I was surprised at how difficult it was to get there and walk to the center. I was so prepared and readying for this day, but to still and listen and to start to regulate my breath, I started to let go of my inner chatter so that when I got to the middle, I could pause and ask the Spirit to fill me. And what came was a use of my breath that I want to share with you, and that might be of assistance to you in this time of Lent as we listen. A cupping of the hands. Perhaps as you might feel called, you could cup your hands now. A holding and a recognition, just like our lungs, that there's the capacity for the Spirit to fill them. And then to empty. So that I found myself breathing in and holding that cup. And breathing out and letting the contents go. exhaling them out. Breathing in as the cup and exhaling and letting go. Filling and emptying. So often we are endowed with so many resources, friends, that it can be overwhelming. We acknowledge what we have in the filling. We also let go in the emptying, knowing that we are called to share our bread, to share our resources with others and this wider world. We breathe in a cup of salvation. We breathe out saving grace for the world. We breathe in, letting go of our fears, our failures. We breathe out, knowing that God can use even that, even our suffering. Friends, you have been likely thinking about what you will take on or give up. As you do so, my prayer is that it would be a meditative gateway for you. Perhaps there would be a stretch of time as you ready yourself for whatever the exercise and practice is, where you acknowledge that Lent is for listening, to find yourself in a space of grace when all the things churn up and try to speak to you about where you are, to listen to them and to let them go. And then in that space to ask again, where is it that God would speak to me? Donna's going to put up a slide here on our screen. I laughingly wanted to share this because Mary Jane, who is on our worship task group, we used this particular, this great image a couple of years ago. I know that Teresa and I had found it. But she was laughing because as she was preparing for worship task group, I think it was in her basement, and then a stack of papers basically fell out on her. And this was the one that came out. And so it reminded us all of the wonderful different practices that we are attracted to on our journeys as we would listen in. Included is deep listening. You'll see silence and centering. We acknowledge that each of us don't have that same stillness and ability to always come and just sit, but all of these creative movements that we take, yoga, visualization, lectio divina, social witness, all involve a bit of that slowing and the intentionality that comes in the same way we think of meditation. To slow down, to check in with our bodies, to understand why we're choosing to pause, and to let God and the Spirit move through us. We're going to move in just a moment to a time of community exchange where I hope that we'll hear from one another. And we want to hear about the practices that have been meaningful to you on the journey. How have they been filling or helped you to empty? This is always a time in this season when we learn from one another. Sometimes we haven't even thought of something that could be fantastic for our journeys. And sometimes we just need to sit next to someone who we know had the strength to see it through because we're in this together. And so take just a moment. We're going to have 2 minutes of silent meditation, readying in your hearts what it is that you would share about your own practice. Maybe it's been particularly tough, and maybe it's particularly challenging this year. Maybe there's an eagerness in your bones to get to the tomb and resurrection. What does it mean to sit still, to be filled, and allow ourselves also to be empty?